I'd like to welcome you to our panel discussion this morning on innovation and open innovation. And let me try to set the context and maybe define that term just a little bit before the panel introduces themselves and we get going with the discussion. It goes without saying that America has reached a point where the sustained rates of economic growth that we have seen over the last several decades are now at a step function. Most analysts can't offer successful explanations as to why we are where we are, so therefore what they have to say is of limited utility. What we do know is that we have been successful as a country in the past by being fantastically innovative in business, innovative in science and technology, innovative in social enterprises and a range of broader enterprises, and so we have been a fantastically innovative country. It is likely going forward that the economy of the world, as it grows more competitive and as innovation competitors and innovative competitors rise up around the world, there'll be one tool or asset that will be of particular value to the American economy as we move forward, and I think that happens to be speed. There are some that have been saying for some time that one way to advance innovation and to increase the speed of innovation in all sectors, in the service sector, in the manufacturing sector, the technology sector, the social enterprise sector, whatever sector you're working in, is to find a way to open the process, to create mechanisms and culture that would allow us to learn from each other and innovate in knowledge networks, if you will, rather than in isolation, and find ways to use speed to our advantage. Now, there's obviously pluses and minuses to all of that. There's ways in which that could be good, ways in which that could be bad. But today's panel will be looking at the extent to which open innovation, or if not open innovation, other models for innovation might be a way to spur American economic growth. Now, where do we need to get? At some point, we need to get to the point where our economy is growing consistently on average over 10-year increments at least at 4%. If you want to retire the national debt, if you want to move the country forward, we have to fundamentally change our rates of economic growth, which we've had difficulty doing, and we're having extreme difficulty doing it right now. So we've got a great panel coming in from a range of different backgrounds, and I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Jim Whitehurst down at the end, who's President and Chief Executive Officer of Red Hat. So starting with Jim and coming this way, just give some short introductions of yourselves.
Sure. Well, I'm Jim Whitehurst, President and CEO of Red Hat. Red Hat is the largest open source software company in the world. We're publicly listed and part of the S&P 500 index of the largest companies in the United States. We focus exclusively on what's called open source software, which is applying the principles of open innovation and the power of participation to computer source code. So all of our products are fully open and are developed by tens of thousands of people around the world. You know, our products run the New York Stock Exchange, actually over half the world's equity trades, most bank trading systems and billing systems, the most mission critical of systems around the world, all built by collections of thousands of people.
Okay. Diana?
My name is Diana Wells. I'm president of Ashoka, Innovators for the Public, an organization founded 30 years ago by William Drayton, who 30 years ago was using open sourcing social innovation as a way to understand where the world is going and to first find and source social entrepreneurs. We now source social innovation across a life cycle of innovation. And what we have found over these 30 years is that when you are sourcing early stage social innovation, it becomes a predictive factor for future trends. So if you want to understand where the world is going, understanding early stage innovation is a critical factor.
Matthew?
I'm an anthropologist by training.
Matthew von Ertfelder. I lead the Insight Strategy and Innovation team at Marriott International. I'm actually an import. I was born in Hong Kong, raised in the United States, and I am tasked with driving innovation across our 19 hotel brands, across our 3,500 hotels across 70 countries.
Rob?
I'm Rob Pecoraro. I write a technology column for one of the local papers. And when I started doing that, I was
called the Washington what?
Post. That's right, yes, the Washington Post. When I started doing this job, I was under the mistaken impression that I could just play with new gadgets all the time, but in fact it involves a lot of looking at policy issues, the things that either help or hinder innovation. And I think that's why I'm here.
Yep. Chris?
I'm Chris Thomas, Chief Strategist at Intel Corporation. We're the largest semiconductor manufacturer in the world. And
Just announced a multi-billion-dollar investment in Arizona and Oregon to expand your capabilities, I noticed.
thank you. Intel's thrived on innovation, but we've also thrived on having to open it up. So open innovation starts with open standards for us. We created open standards, which created the PC platform, which created an ecosystem that just basically blew the doors open on what technology could do. It's now evolved into things like open source, open standards. It's creating open APIs between different products and content. And so, the next phase here is open content and sharing. Doesn't mean we have to give it away. It means we have to make it available to help others thrive.
Okay. Amy?
I'm Amy Stursberg, the Executive Director of the Blackstone Charitable Foundation, and the foundation is committed to supporting entrepreneurship. We launched in April our first initiative in this space, $50 million targeted to geographic regions where Blackstone works and lives and where there's high unemployment. So basically just looking to invest in collaborative approaches to addressing entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs in an innovative way and in ways that, like sort of around the open innovation that are collaborative. So we go to places where people are working together to address the issues of entrepreneurship.
Okay. Mitzi?
I'm Mitzi Montoya, Executive Dean of the College of Technology and Innovation at ASU on one of the new campuses, the Polytechnic campus. The focus of the college is novel in that we have all of the STEM disciplines represented in one college and with a strong focus on technological entrepreneurship and innovation. We also are very actively engaged in working on applied industry sector growth models where we're working to integrate our education and research with targeted industry sectors.
Santu?
I'm Santak Badesha for Xerox. I'm fellow there and also manage the Open Innovation Program in the Xerox Innovation Group. Xerox, as you all know, it started with a copier printer on the desktop to now all the way to high-speed color printing as well as black and white printing. Moving forward, the trends are to get more into the services sector, so we are moving towards now products and services systems as we move forward.
So, Jim, let's start with you. What's the resistance to the open logic? What is it? I mean, you've been driving open sources software. There's all kinds of people. There's like battles been going on for many years in this arena. What's holding us back either in our culture? What's the downside? What's the whole argument about open software development or open innovation? What's the argument about?
Well, frankly, we built an entire economy based on physical things, right? So, going all the way back, whether it's organizational structures going back to the railroads that were built to ultimately manage capital and organizational models to, break up pieces down so different pieces of capital were managed well. So we're used to physical property and ownership laws. And so when concepts of intellectual property came along, or ideas, we define them as intellectual property.
Even written into the Constitution. I think we're one of the only countries that has property defined in its governing founding document. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so how we've defined both between copyrights and patents, we've actually defined ownership around ideas. And as soon as you get to areas, which many areas are in today, where innovations need to build on top of innovations, which need to build on top of innovations, you have business models that don't work well, which are, again, primarily, whether it's capital models or organizational models, are built around allocating capital and looking at returns against physical capital, whether it's intellectual property laws, which treat ideas as property rather than something open to be built on, mental models for how we think about things. It fundamentally twists the world in a different way, all the way down to, for Red Hat, and just quickly, most technology companies define a 5-year roadmap and they work to build that roadmap, and you sleep well at night that you've hired the most brilliant CTO you can buy. If you look at what Red Hat does, we have to rely on our customers to build that. So I sleep very well at night that we're going to deliver the right products because, you know, Google and Amazon and all these other companies are using that technology, but I don't have full control over that. So it's a different way of thinking. It's a whole different mental model. As soon as you open up and say, I'm going to give this out and I'm going to give it away, but I do believe that more will come back to me.
Well, with that sort of at least conceptualization of this open question, which has to do with the long-standing culture of property ownership and the ownership of ideas and so forth. I'm just going to go down the row to see who wants to comment on what you think is the single thing slowing down innovation in the United States today. What's the single thing? And I'm going to start with Amy, since you're thinking about it on a community development basis and on a stimulation basis. Why are you guys doing what you're doing? Why do we care about stimulating the rate of innovation? And why isn't it just this simplistic thing, hey, you guys are all kind of worthless, just let the market take care of all this and everything will be fine? What's slowing us up?
Well, I think, you know, it's really about, you know, from our perspective, at least in my first investment, I think it's just making innovation and entrepreneurship something that everybody knows exists for them, that's available, you know, that just even, we have this, the first investment we made was bringing this idea that exists, the Launchpad at the University of Miami, which teaches every student on the first day that they enter the University of Miami that entrepreneurship and innovation is a viable career path. And it's not a course, and it's not something you get credit for, it's not something you pay for, it's just something from day one during the registration process or during the, you know, whatever, freshman orientation, they're told about this opportunity that they have to go into this building that exists in the middle of the campus that teaches them how to write a business plan. No idea is a bad idea. And by the time they graduate, whether they've started a company or not, which, by the way, many of the students have, which was not what they thought was going to happen. In the first year, I think 65 viable businesses were started and 172 jobs or something like that.
So, Amy, you think, I mean, what you're putting on the table, and I want to get a list out here, what you think holds us back is sort of a lack of awareness about entrepreneurial processes, and it's not as broadly throughout the entire society as one might like to see. Matthew, what do you see traveling around the world? You know, you guys are running a global corporation. What's holding back the Americans? What's holding us back?
Well, I think that there needs to be an appreciation for the idiosyncrasies, you know, of various countries as you expand overseas, an appreciation for cultural factors, an understanding of how innovation needs to be grounded in those target consumers in those markets. And, you know, for us, that's really driven a lot of our organizational change over the last several years. In fact, we've reorganized our whole company so that we have satellite continental lodging structures in the UK, Middle East, Africa, Europe, Asia Pacific, and the Americas, so that we can get completely immersed and ingrained in those cultures and to use that understanding to drive our innovation processes and to ensure that our products and services are, again, always focused on that core consumer need.
Senator, let's just go down the road. What's holding us back? Just a couple words. What's holding us back?
If you look at the innovation process, it's a lot more than just having an idea. You have to go through the steps of ideation, then design, develop, delivery. Then you also have to capture the value, and so there are investments which are required of personnel and of the resources in general at different stages of this process, and industry in general has done a fair job in connecting these various steps in the process. Xerox has been in the forefront in this one, and even as late as a couple of years ago, we are, when it comes to emerging markets, we are not just going there for markets, but we also building our innovation networks. We just built one in India last year, and getting involved with the academia and as well as the local businesses there. So it's a lot more than the issues are resources, talent availability, and access to the market.
Okay, resources, talent, availability, and access to the market. And we're going to go down this way. So just short answers right now, because I've got some much longer questions. I'm trying to get your brain sort of eased into this. So, Mitzi.
My short answer would be we're seeing right now a symptomatic of a larger systemic problem, which is STEM-based education. So we need greater emphasis on science, technologies, engineering, and math, so we have the resource, the human capital that we need to do the innovation and to be entrepreneurs.
Okay, Amy, we heard from you. Chris?
Outside the U.S., our task is creating innovation so that we can open up our markets. More than half of our revenue comes outside the U.S. now. Inside the U.S., I would say our biggest issue is stagnation. There's lack of innovation in industry because we've actually grown and succeeded. So trying to get new entrants into spaces that are already locked out either by legislation or by market competition disincentives is a big issue.
Okay, Rob?
I would say the government has gotten a little too generous in granting intellectual property monopolies. The patent system is one of the things I love to complain about. I printed out this little graphic this morning. It's one designer's attempt to encapsulate the number of patent lawsuits flying around the smartphone industry. It features, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like 20 different companies, all of whom are suing each other over a variety of patents that a lot of people have looked at and concluded probably shouldn't have been issued in the first place. We have a system that seems to reward litigation more than innovation. You have a bit of it's almost an IP enclosure movement. Let me defend what I've got instead of building on what's already out there. Of course, a lot of other countries are making the same mistake, so this may not be holding us back relative to everyone else.
Or sue everybody that's got something and see if they'll ultimately pay me to get me to go away. So,
I do hear that's where the money is.
Yes.
Just an interesting statistic. We spend twice as much on litigation in the U.S. as we do on R&D, tort law.
Diana?
I would argue that with regard to social innovation, the U.S. is in a very strong position. It's one of our strengths. It has always been part of our history. And that you can divide the world between people who believe that change is possible and people who don't believe that change is possible. And we are about delivering those shining examples of people who are bringing change so that they inspire others to do so. I think what's holding us back in the social innovation space is different than the for-profit space, and it's we are free from being beholden to shareholders, and so the issues of ownership and property rights are not there. If your end goal is social impact, you want to give it away. You want other people to take your idea and run with it, if that is your ethical core of bringing about positive social change. And so where we are held back in the social sector is around being equal players at the table.
So Mitzi and Rob, why don't you guys take a first cut at, is this false that we're losing ground from an innovation perspective? And if it's not false, what are the consequences of not finding new methodologies, just sticking with the old methodology? So, Mitzi?
No, I don't think it's a falsehood. And I think just one example, I was looking up some stats on R&D and inventiveness and innovation in the U.S. And just to give an example, in 15 years, China moved from 14th to 2nd place in published research articles, second only behind the U.S. And if you look at the trajectory and where that will go, it says that we will be surpassed. That's just to pick one example. So no, I don't think it's just a cry for something that's not real. It's very real. And again, the challenge is in terms of how do we change that? We change that at the core. We need to change it. I'll pick universities as one example. That means we need to compel, promote, encourage, and enable entrepreneurship and innovation from our research labs and connect that to translating that into outcomes and engagement with companies. So no, I don't think it's simply a something for press. It's reality, and we're seeing real differences in outputs.
So, Rob, you've been at the Post for many, many years and looking at this space for a long time through several waves of seemingly fantastic innovative success. Yet we are where we are from an economic perspective, and it surely can't be just as simple as a bunch of bad real estate deals and not so smart bankers. I mean, it's got to be somewhat more complicated than that. What are the consequences for us if we don't go in new directions from your view?
Well, to sort of continue what I just mentioned, the opportunity cost. If you have, if somebody manages to get a patent secured for combining things that are obvious by themselves, maybe they're not completely obvious combined, you can use that as a weapon against other people. Other people have to spend time designing around this obvious patent. These are engineers and programmers who could have been working on features that people actually want, and instead they're running in circles trying to avoid being on the receiving end of one of these arrows. Yeah, another example I'd point out, look at two things I write about a lot. One is the World Wide Web. The other is multi-channel television, cable and satellite. The web is an open standard. You don't need to pay anybody to develop for it. Whereas if you actually want to build something that connects into the cable TV ecosystem, good luck. That's a closed market. It's very difficult to get into, and that's why no one likes their cable box.
And some say the same thing about electric utilities and the electricity distribution system and so forth. So Chris, you work for one of these big multinational corporations which is purveying a product which is transformative when applied, but how do you build an innovation ecosystem on that basis that at the end of the day, not to be critical of Intel, half your business is outside the United States. Most of the jobs you've added in the last 10 years are outside of the United States also. How do you get an innovation ecosystem in and around the Intel Corporation that might be open, that also then has material benefits to the United States in a positive going forward way?
Well, I don't think we can, narrowing down to the United States actually narrows down all of our opportunities to innovate and sell. If I run around the world probably more than the U.S. over the last 3 to 4 years, and America's still perceived as the innovation leader, and we actually are the emissaries of innovation. The challenge there is making sure it links back to American products and the like. The one I was scared about this week is a pitch that is part of an education event in China that said we're moving from made in China to innovated in China. And that's in an Intel pitch, by the way. That's by an Intel China person. But the whole concept here of, we're the incumbent to knock over. And so we have innovation centers around the world, and we have to do that to maintain our profits. At the same time, we have a huge amount of innovation going into the U.S. per, the announcements today and others, where the majority of our innovation starts in the U.S., stays in the U.S. Challenge is we've been importing a lot of that talent as well. So the ability for Americans to outrun the world is an issue for us. And can we maintain it? Yeah, we're pushing hard. But a lot of that has to be understood as globalization, as opposed to we can keep ourselves as the core U.S. company that is innovating for the world. We're having to bring the world in and innovate together. And if we can keep that as a U.S. leadership, that's awesome.
Just as a sidebar, some would argue that we can have these fantastically successful corporations like Xerox and Intel and others which are operating on a global basis, and then we have a certain percentage of the population of the United States that's moving forward into very high-wage jobs as they work as designers and conceptualizers. Marriott would be another example. But at the end of the day, we're offshoring so many of the other jobs that then we end up with social and economic disruption within the United States. So then it means, well, if that's the way that technology businesses go in sort of optimization, let's go to the service businesses, which are different because we need the services in the United States. We need efficiency. We need effectiveness. And so, Matthew, just talk a little bit about what is open innovation or rates of innovation or rates of change? What does it mean for a service-oriented business, which, of course, is the majority of the U.S. economy at the moment?
Well, for us, it's not about the what, it's about the how. It's not about the product or the service. It's about the value and the experience that is attached to that product or service. So for us, and to answer your earlier question, one, it's about having a process that works within your company, within your enterprise, that allows you to understand those deep consumer needs to drive the process. So for us, what we do is we gather the insights from deep consumer research, and we synthesize those insights into insight platforms. They drive our concepts, would drive our design development process and the eventual products or services that we roll out or deploy to the market. So for us, it's about focusing on the experience and the value around those products, and I think recognizing what is an incremental innovation that is going to allow us to keep up with the competition, to maintain our position in the pack in what is evolutionary or revolutionary, and allocating time to focus on innovation at those different levels.
So at Xerox, inside a big corporation, you know, somebody could argue, well, this open innovation is going to be like basic research. The American government's going to fund basic research. Everyone's going to use it. Everyone will benefit, and the Americans might or might not benefit, even though they paid for all of it. Open innovation might be this notion of, well, if you take a historically successful corporation like Xerox and all of a sudden you try to open up its innovation process to internal and external forces and dynamics, what happens inside the corporation at that point? I assume, and I've heard this from others, it'll just collapse and Xerox will become dust.
No, that's
and the whole fate of the company now rests on your answer.
Thank you.
Yes.
I do want to go back.
Yes.
If you want to move up in the food chain, and professional services is the way to do. And just supporting what the others said, the reasons, what contributes for this loss of jobs, moving, being transported to other countries, at least out of U.S. Cost of doing business here is fairly high, wages, benefits, and the regulatory requirements here and litigation somebody mentioned before. The trade policy, it's probably open more on one end than the other end. Our tax policies are also not favorable. You can actually, businesses can book the expenses in one place and then revenue some other place, and then bring back if need be. If not, then keep spending over there. So there are and then the talent, as somebody else mentioned, that also is the key factor. If you just look at the number of graduates in India and in China, now this is specifically for services, business process service-oriented economy. Those numbers are very, very high. The quality has gone up than before. So there's a reason why the services sector is looking for the talent somewhere else. Xerox is a very well-managed company, proud to be. And we do foresee the need to move from hardware-centric offerings to more services-centric. And as I said earlier, it's a product service systems oriented. The change is now accepted by everybody within the company. There are some good examples. IBM did that many years ago and moved almost entirely away from the hardware and company. Other large corporations are doing the same thing. So this is not something nice to do. This, I think, you have to do this if you want to move in the food chain. And Xerox has been pioneering this.
Yeah. So we'll just see who wants to take a shot at this, or several of you if you want to. So what's the hardest problem you're working on right now relative to the notion of advancing or speeding innovation? What's the toughest problem that you presently have that you're working on? Who wants to take a crack at that? Matthew?
I can say as a formative early entrant into kind of the innovation world for Marriott International, one of the challenges we have is, one, getting people to understand the process of innovation, to get to a shared definition of what innovation is. I mentioned before, incremental, evolutionary, revolutionary. Getting the extremely high-level support you need to overcome the inherent resistance to change. When you think about innovation, it is by definition a problem for companies that have developed rigid, predictable, reliable systems to roll out the products and services that underlie and support their competitive advantages. So to go outside of those systems is not easy for a company. That's a challenge. And also I think a company like ours with so many different brands that need to be continually refreshed and advanced, coming up with a way to prioritize efforts so that we can make use of what is a very small, nimble team, as well as capitalize on open innovation opportunities, requires a lot of strategy in order to realize the true fruits of innovation.
Okay, others, hardest problems? Yeah.
Well, for us, we only work in open innovation, so all of our intellectual property we give away and encourage others to use,
right.
Though we are a for-profit enterprise. And so building a business model that works around open innovation, I think is critically important for open innovation to work. And, I know there are a lot of nonprofit activities around open innovation, but ultimately we need to have profit motive to create, the massive jobs. And so, Red Hat, we spend a lot of time building models. And, our key term that we use in our mission statement is to be the catalyst in communities of contributors. And I won't go through the whole thing, but basically we have figured out a way that we uniquely add value around something that is entirely open, which, we've grown our workforce in the United States by over 40% in the last several years. So coming back to your initial statement, I don't think that we have fallen behind in innovation. I actually think we would be much, much further behind in our economy if it weren't for how fast we innovate. Right? The fact that we are losing share in the automotive industry isn't a lack of innovation there. There's a whole set of structural issues. The reason we're not further behind is we've built, I'd say, an open collaborative thing called Sandhill Road in the venture capital community that allocates capital and management talent with ideas and puts those together, or things that we do to catalyze communities that build pretty extraordinary technology in a very, very open way. But making sure we find business models that work around open innovation is something that we're on the front lines of, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
So we've got resistance to change, we've got new business models, new conceptualizations. Other hardest problems? Yes.
I was going to say, our biggest problem is customers for innovation.
Customers for innovation.
In other words, we spend most of our job opening up the market so that the innovation can flow through.
Right.
And we've done that by creating, open platforms. Our most recent effort is a thing called MeeGo we've done with Nokia, where we've created an open source operating system environment for smartphones and the like. But we couldn't do that as a locked down vendor. We have to open it up to the innovation around the world. Each of those activities is breaking a door open for innovation. So most of our work is opening up somewhat resistance to innovation and moving it to the next step.
Well, also there's this whole concern that a lot of people have, that this notion of consumption-based economies, which then are driven by innovations as ways of evolving new markets, are something that may not be sustainable in the same way that they've been in the past. Amy, you were going to add something.
Yeah, this is coming at it from a little bit of a different perspective, but for us, I think what we're finding is, if we find something, whether it's express licensing or capital or launchpad, finding the partners, whether it's a university or an economic development entity or a state government, that even understand it or even get it, sort of lack of consciousness of what it's all about, really, from my perspective.
So the biggest problem for you is engagement with people that you can have a reasonable conversation with about how to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship.
Or take what I'm willing to replicate or expand into your university, but you don't even know what I'm talking about. It's just
we do.
You do.
Yes, Diana.
I can build on that point. I think from where we sit, we're sourcing and stimulating and encouraging new ideas, and we do it with a very, very small financial infusion. The philanthropic sector can take those ideas to another stage, but for the ones that really work, that could blow out global, we don't have the financial instruments yet that will help these ideas grow in the way that business sectors ideas can grow.
Okay, yes.
I think one of the interesting challenges that we're dealing with, now speaking from a university perspective, is we can play a role as a convener, but one of the challenges that we deal with regularly is, as you're looking at technology platform development, is to find that right mechanism for collaboration, to bring competitors to the table, but that will advance U.S. industry, global industry, and so on. So building those mechanisms, structuring the problems that will bring people together so that you have less of a proprietary view of technology, and to invest jointly in technology development so that it can, as a step function, advance industry. So the structuring mechanisms for collaboration in an open model are an interesting challenge.
So what's the highest speed, most successful when you saw it? You were like, oh my, what is this innovative organization, service, or thing that you've ever seen?
I sort of already said it, but the World Wide Web.
But we're slow, Rob. The World Wide Web, yeah.
Yeah, but I'd say actually the internet as a whole, where, you know, one of the greatest things that was done is when Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn were writing TCP/IP, they did not, you know, go out and patent it, try to put an intellectual property fence around it. And I should note they both seem to be doing quite well on their own financially, which has allowed all this other innovation to be built on top of it. It's a platform and not a fence, and that, you know, see how fast that's grown. This has been the stuff I've been writing about for, you know, over 10 years in my column, and we still don't know where it's going. It's upended my own industry and a lot of other ones. It's caused a lot of disruption, but, you know, that's how innovation is supposed to work.
Right, and there's been examples of that in the past where there were platforms that came about. I mean, Thomas Edison had a number of impacts, you know, 110 years ago, 120 years, 110, 120 years ago. What's been the most innovative thing, organization that any of you have seen? Chris, you're going to say something.
Oh, I got to experience the ride of the PC industry and created a standards body that's called the Desktop Management Task Force, which took thousands of companies and put them together working on the same challenge. And, you know, what we experienced was that same blowout of technology moving rapidly.
So standards, coming together and doing standards.
Standards, I think, at that point would have been the word open today.
Yeah.
We're experiencing a new one right now, which is called cloud innovation. And next week we're going to be launching an innovation cloud for humanitarian efforts, taking all of this in-network services and blowing it into a very rapid deployment for humanitarian efforts. Mm-hmm. And so we've got another wave coming at us, so innovation doesn't always stop. Mm-hmm. So I think the new rapid one is looking at cloud services and looking at how we're turning those into rapid adoption cycles. So I'd like to not say everything's negative. I think there's a lot of positive going on as well.
Absolutely. Others? Diana?
Within Ashoka, over years, we saw a pattern with social entrepreneurs who were working with small producers, and recognized that if we brought them to business as an equal player at the table, that we could begin to do business differently for business and have much more social impact at the same time. It's an idea that we call the hybrid value chain. There's a Harvard Business Review article in the September issue about just how this has happened, that social entrepreneurs, because they are embedded in a community, they understand the local market intelligence, and in working with business can open up enormous new markets. So social entrepreneurs can be the open source for business to open up entire new markets and have social impact at the same time.
So there's a blending that you're talking about there, where the social entrepreneurs who are working to solve some sort of particular problem that might be out there are actually opening up markets for others who want to innovate to adapt to their new focus. Okay, that's an important point. Yes?
Linux. And I know that's close to home for what we do, but let me leave Red Hat out of it. First off, most of you probably never even see Linux unless you're geeks out there, but the World Wide Web would not exist without it. Google could not exist in its economic model without the impact of it. So let me stop there on the impact, but I think what's fascinating there is back to how do you get competitors to work together in enlightened self-interest. Open source and getting literally Intel and Oracle and IBM and HP and Red Hat and a myriad companies working together, all to create something, even though these are really strong competitors, that we've been able to jointly innovate together and build something that really serves as the backbone for almost anything you do on the web every single day. But I think as a model, it shows that you can get very profit-motive, very self-interested parties to work together to innovate in a whole new way, even the staunchest of competitors, to create something that's just fundamentally innovative and new.
Others on this? Hearing none. So Amy, one of the interesting things that sort of strikes me, there's what you guys are doing, there's Kauffman Foundation, there's others that have been making investments, there's social entrepreneurial-oriented foundations like Ashoka and others. Now there's all these other kinds of organizations that aren't necessarily derivative of functioning corporations operating in driving businesses forward. What's this all about? Why is this happening now as an area of philanthropic or social development or community development focus? Why is that? Why are you doing what you're doing? What's it coming from?
Well, I think, the foundation was founded when Blackstone went public in 2007, and I think initially they were just sort of going to be a traditional corporate philanthropy. And then when the economic crisis happened, they wanted to do something, senior management wanted to do something that was more sort of aligned with what they do for a living, that could have more impact. And so we sort of did your typical due diligence around all kinds of issues related to finance, financial education, microfinance, et cetera. And I think Blackstone, the founders of Blackstone, Pete Peterson, Steve Schwartzman, see themselves as entrepreneurs. And so the idea was, let's do something that's aligned with what we do for a living and create jobs in response to the economic crisis, or help, not create jobs, because I hate to say that. I mean, we had this conversation earlier. It's not really about, but how do you create an environment that ultimately will create jobs, whether it's through education or through all different kinds of activities. And so that's what we decided we would support. So I think in our case, it really was in a direct response to the economic crisis.
Yeah, the reason I ask is it's sort of interesting. So that so the founders, the donors, the firm when they go public, is this, the ultimate capitalists, the risk takers, right out on the edge, making these investments, and then when they have some substantial capital infusion, they take some of that for the good of everyone, and then what they decide to focus on is stimulating that process, which in and of itself, if you just read the textbooks, is supposed to be this naturally occurring, completely unimpeded, laissez-faire. And so what's this all about? I mean, why are we at ASU running, which we are, with resources from a number of organizations, a range of efforts to enhance entrepreneurial education, to enhance ways in which we can get more social entrepreneurs and more business entrepreneurs out of the university environment? Why are we having to do this? Why doesn't the market just do all of this by itself? And I'm not a socialist, so.
We've been looking at this, and Vital Wave did a survey that says that 9 out of 10 jobs coming out in the market don't exist now. So only 1 in 10 people, and moving forward of about 500 million people entering the job market over the next few years will have a job in the traditional market, which means 9 out of 10 people have to find a job, make a job, invent a job. So we've run a Generation Y board of advisors, which means you have to be under 30 and talking. Their attitude is they go to work to make the money.
We have lots of those folks, and they can all talk.
Well, explaining what they're thinking. Their attitude is they go to work to generate revenue to do their work at home, which is where they think they're going to make their money. And the great example of that right now is this flourishing concept of app stores and selling your products in the market. We've got people, and I had one friend said, I'm not starting a company anymore, I'm just going and doing it. And that's selling my stuff on the net, making things happen. So our younger generation is not looking at institutions as where they're going to get their jobs. It's where they have their job while they build the job they're going to get. And I think that's why you're seeing that flourishing is, people entering the system don't see the system as where their destination is.
Right. And then, Diana, talk a little bit about it's kind of interesting because we've seen this also where we started this program where a investor gave us an endowment from which we were able to fund student enterprises, some of which were companies, some of which were social enterprises, and then they've then run off with that investment and then start those things and get them going. And it's this blending, and you even said it also, Chris, this blending of social purpose, social outcomes, economic purpose, business outcomes, the processes of organizational formation, capitalization, problem solving, and so forth, innovation are the same kinds of challenges and problems, just directed towards different outcomes, which are less and less separate. And so, talk a little bit about all that.
Yeah. One of the biggest areas of job growth over the last 10 years has been in the not-for-profit sector. And in the economic recession, certainly the not-for-profit sector was hit, but not with the incredible swings that we saw in business. So I just want to put that out there as an important piece. We've also seen the, as you said, the blurring between the nonprofit and the for-profit. We see legislation that around B Corps and C Corps that have provided a way for people to have, pursue social good within a for-profit guise. I think we're already seeing some folks move back to the not-for-profit from the for-profit, but, we're really in early days here, and there's going to be a lot of innovation in that blending. I think it's also a historic moment. I think you can't but look at what happened over the last 3 years and not think, that we need to rethink how we are building a society differently. And Ashoka's theory of change is that the only way we're going to solve more problems is have more problem solvers. So how do you go about ensuring that we are educating people with the skills for the future that are going to allow each of us to continue to evolve as the rate of change increases? And entrepreneurship is one of those pieces. What are the key skill sets around social entrepreneurship? We're seeing a couple of them. Teamwork is critical in a world where you can keep costs down by open sourcing ideas so that you can run a leaner institution. We are not managing the 3,000 social entrepreneurs that we're finding. We're seeding their ideas, they're doing it. But we, by being in touch with those folks, capture their intelligence and their ideas and their insights, and we can take that information and move and engage to create change collaboratively across various sectors. So one thing that we found is that by looking at social innovation or social entrepreneurship, we're not stuck in silos, and there's a lot of innovation that comes out of that as well. What's new in the field of, or what's old in the field of education may be new in the field of health, and so that by building a community of change makers who are share the value of making positive social change, there's inherent innovation there. So, and that's an old idea in business, these innovation hubs where people are sharing the process of iterating their idea so it comes across more quickly and more effectively. Last point on skills that we're seeing for entrepreneurship: teamwork, empathy, being able, and which is how we're talking about what the market's saying, what your shareholders are saying, what your stakeholders and clients and customers are saying. If you're not listening, you will not succeed. And leadership, a certain kind of leadership that is a value-based leadership.
Jim, were you wanting to add to that? I couldn't tell.
Well, I think broadly, the good news is, the birth of the internet, social networking, a lot of the things that we often complain about, our kids doing, actually leads to a change in culture that's very positive for innovation, in the sense that, and I sit around with a lot of execs in random times complaining, these kids these days, they all want to run their own division, within 6 months. But realistically, what you're seeing is a generation that is looking for the best idea to win, not based on hierarchy, that ideas to be vetted and talked about and listened to. So we are building, I think, almost by happenstance, a next generation culture that is particularly well suited to open innovation, to being open to ideas. So I am extremely positive on our relative outlook, even relative to the rest of the world. We really do. The new people that we bring into Red Hat, and when I go speak at universities, the number of people who have thought about innovation, have started their own businesses. I spoke recently at my alma mater, Rice University, and 5 guys came up with business plans. When I was in college, I was, drinking beer, having a good time, right? I mean, it's incredible.
They might have been business plans about that, but
yeah, but I don't recall them now. But I really do think we are building a culture that's particularly well suited to innovation, and it's not because we've tried to do it, and it's not because we're investing enough in education. We're certainly not. Right. But this thing called the internet and the tools that have built up around it are building a generation that are looking for a meritocracy. They're looking for the best ideas to win. They're looking to break down hierarchy, and all those things are great in terms of driving innovation as we move forward.
So let's go back to something Rob brought up, which I think is actually the case. And so it's been interesting that the culture seems to be evolving more rapidly than the discourse in our government. The system that we operate within, in the way the government is working right now, was a one-off repair from the fact that all property was owned by the Crown. We threw the Crown out. We decided to then create private ownership of ideas in the Constitution itself. That has its strengths and its weaknesses. That is something that worked maybe in the past. Maybe it doesn't work in the future. So if you moved away from that model to a differentiated model, what would be the main characteristics of the new model, other than just the simple term of openness? What would be the main, I'm going to start with you, Rob, the main characteristics of the new model?
Well, I would say if we actually got back to the original concept of intellectual property in the Constitution, which is, this isn't real property. It's not an inalienable right. It's a right we create. Congress can, provide these limited monopolies to authors and inventors to promote the progress of the sciences and the useful arts, not because, the authors and the inventors deserve it, but because it benefits everyone else. Mm-hmm. And if we actually means tested this instead of acting as if, yes, copyright is so great that, I should get copyright to something I write, and then, my heirs can keep that copyright for the next 50 years because somehow I will continue to be creative and productive from beyond the grave.
No.
I
noticed Mark Twain is the 30th most popular book in the United States right now. So
yeah.
I think he died about 100 years ago. So.
Yeah, just to emphasize that point, this does not go back to the Constitution, right? No. The whole concept, especially software patenting, right. And in the software world, that's much more onerous than copyrights. I think no one says if you write code that code shouldn't be yours for many, many years. But the idea of applying something called patenting and what is an idea and what is non-obvious and how do you patent that? If you look at the great innovations, whether it was Xerox PARC, the original designs for the Mac that came from all that work, all the original work that Microsoft did, all the work that IBM did, that was all done before patenting of software. And now patenting of software, layer upon layer upon layer, you cannot use your computer today without violating at least 100 patents. You don't know what they are. The people who own the patents don't know what they are. It's just a minefield thicket that's developed over time, which slows innovation. In fact, if anything, it brings back kind of power to a very small handful of companies that have the wherewithal to have done massive patenting, to have collected portfolios, and it really is mutually assured destruction applied to intellectual property. No one wants to go up against a Microsoft or an IBM or an Intel even on any type of patenting matter because these guys have tens of thousands of patents. The system is just fundamentally broken and has to be reworked.
So a couple of you have mentioned that there's this, I don't know if ignorance is the right word, but lack of engagement, lack of a general understanding. If you look at the national debate going on in Congress, you'd think that there wasn't much of an economic crisis. You'd think that there was basically an argument about ideological views about taxation. It actually turns out there is an economic situation that we're in right now, and it's difficult at multiple levels to engage people in meaningful conversations about how to open and speed innovation or how to teach entrepreneurship. So why is it that that this is not something that's more common in the discourse? Why is it that it's not? Why is it that it's hard?
Well, it is hard.
Okay, it is hard. That's always
hard.
true.
It's courageous.
it takes courage for someone to take the risk of putting an idea out there and to do something different. I mean, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people to think outside the box, and when Ashoka does its selection process to find our social entrepreneurs, we don't look for a pitch. We look for a life story. We're looking for how this person came to this idea, starting from when they were young, who this person is, where does this idea come from in their own life history. And what we found after doing several hundred of these interviews is that people who grew up to be social entrepreneurs started as young people pursuing their idea, and there were a couple of critical factors. There was always someone in their life, whether it was a teacher, a family member, a friend, someone at their church, who helped them give themselves permission. They gave themselves permission to pursue their idea, whether it was for their school, their community, social, business, anything. And so how do we ensure that there are more people who have that experience? And I think where we are today, this historic moment, I mean, I'm experiencing the same trend when you go out and talk to a college campus, and we're seeing it at ASU with our partnership, that there is an enormous energy around young people who care and want to do something different, and that's going to ensure our economic growth.
Mitzi?
I think it's hard because of tradition. So we have traditional ways of, and it doesn't matter what sector you're talking about. If you're talking about the university, we have traditional ways of operating, and so it's hard to make changes. It's hard to educate in a different way. If you're talking about industry, there's the traditional way of being responsive to your shareholders, and therefore it's hard to do something different. So we're looking for, and what we need are the nonconformists, and yet we educate in a way that compels conformity. So it makes it, and that's starting at, not just K-12, it's P-20. So I think tradition is one of our challenges. We're trying to buck tradition, and that makes it then therefore a difficult change process.
Yeah. Chris, then Jim. I think Chris wanted to say something.
I'd take off on Mitzi's comment. Tradition, I'd say institutions in general, people don't like to change, and they like their revenue streams. So if you take any institutionalized industry, and I don't care which one, so I'm not going to accuse anybody, every new innovation going to that industry is gobbled up. Most of them get gobbled up and shelved because they don't want to stop a revenue stream. So we've got massive innovation going on, but where you see it breaking out is on the internet and in places where we don't have institutionalized industry. Mm-hmm. So, to your point of tradition is I want to keep the status quo because it's good for me. And we're watching the young people run around it with the tools that we're enabling with the internet. So we know that there's innovation, and we can watch this happening. But to your tradition, I'd call institutions, and we go that route.
Jim?
It's not just that people don't want to change, it's change to what? I mean, I often feel like Red Hat, we're one of the very few companies I'd say is truly on the bleeding edge with no intellectual property. We give everything away. But even for me, going into next year, right, I got to set a budget because Wall Street wants to see a budget. When I set a budget, that includes a revenue projection and expenses. So you say we're going to spend X% of revenue on R&D. Now 5 new people come up with some really interesting things, that bubble up from the bottom that I'd love to have them go do. Well, am I going to cut something? Am I going to have to say no? From the capital markets and how we communicate with the budgeting process internally, to culturally looking at my head of engineering and saying, I know you're telling me to do this, but a guy 5 levels down in your organization has an interesting idea, let's let it bubble up, to how you ultimately compensate and assess. There are so many process upon process upon process that's been built up in old world allocating capital, looking for return on capital, that have to change. And we're, I think, a shining star of somebody at a corporate level doing something different. But even for me, and I spend a lot of time talking to professors and others, we got to define a whole new set of processes that work in a model that's truly fostering innovation and creativity. You get little pockets of it where people say, well, I'll take a little 5% over here and let this happen, and let's get some good articles written about it. But when you start thinking about doing it for your whole company, it's a massive amount of stuff that has to happen and change to really be able to enable truly open innovation.
Chris, you wanted to add?
I don't want to dominate here, but Rob brought up a great point, which is we're seeing a change when you say we have to change. We focus a lot on education, and education has been a destination for us forever. This year we're switching. Education is a foundation that leads to entrepreneurship, which is creating businesses that leads to jobs and economic viability. So we're literally changing our focus in education from the destination of educated people to the destination of jobs and change. And if we don't change our perspective, we're not going to make that type of function, which means we shouldn't be measuring how well we read and write, but how well we prepare for jobs. And there's a whole different set of thinking about where our destination goes.
So why don't we talk a little bit in the next few minutes about two things. First, one of the roles that I don't know how I got on this thing, but I'm on the National Council for Innovation, which was established recently, and so there's a bunch of us sitting around the table that are university types and corporate types and entrepreneurial types and others, and we're supposed to be coming up with this fantastic set of ideas. And we're not quite to that point yet, because it's most people, for the reasons that we just talked about, they don't really want ideas that are highly disruptive. They want ideas that can leverage from what we have to get temporary recovery and then just get back to the status quo. And so there's a lot of status quo ideas that are bouncing around. And so let's talk a little bit about what is your best idea to speed innovation in the private sector, on the internet, in the social enterprise development. What is the single best idea that you want to put on the table? And I feel bad about picking on someone first, but I'm going to pick on Matthew first. So
That's a real bullet.
Yes.
Let's see the VP of Insight here.
Yes. Wow. It was partly because of that title, VP of Insight. I'm like, man.
Well, you know, I actually brought this up earlier. You know, when you think about great ideas, you know, for us, what drives everything that we do are consumer insights. So for us, it's using ethnography, you know, and really studying our consumers and really listening with our eyes and continually drilling down into that unmet consumer need to really arrive at something that really does drive relevance and loyalty. And I'd say one of the
So first, I got that idea. So interactive, ethnographically based innovation, adapting to basically the market driving innovation, but you figuring out how to hear it.
Exactly. So, for instance, thinking about innovating product, you know, we focus a lot on innovating public space in our hotels, innovating guest rooms, and we are observationists. You know, we really do spend a lot of time to follow and track guest behavior to see where we are meeting expectations and where we may have overlooked unarticulated needs or wants. Mm-hmm. And that's something that for us has been very important, and it has fueled so many insights that have driven programs like our Great Room program, which is about reactivating public space in our Marriott hotel brand, or reinventing rooms. We have a program called The Room That Works, where we actually observed that guests were actually moving furniture. Actually, things were, housekeepers would come back to the room and, you know, the whole room looked like, you know, a tornado had come through it. So people observed that, hey, you know what, we're not accommodating guest needs. So we actually went and designed the Guest That Works with Steelcase, one of the
So rather than nailing the furniture to the floor,
exactly. Now, it sounds so simple, but again, it was a real frustration point. But recognizing that guest need by studying guest behavior and using that to support programs and letting it drive your thinking was really an incredible insight, and it's something that continues to yield great benefits to us across all the programs that we launch across all of our brands.
Okay, that's idea one, ethnographically based innovation, which probably has applicability in a range of other things and does fit in well with the notion of open.
Absolutely.
So let's start here and go down the aisle.
The
best idea.
The best idea is actually it's a responsibility for everybody, academia, industry, funding agencies, you know, government labs together. Focus on, at least for the time being, on a needs-driven capability building rather than we're going to build and somebody's going to come.
So needs-driven, that's what you're getting on the table.
Right, right. And we have used this model for the New York State, at least. There was a task force from the New York State governor looking for ideas for economic development in the state. And it was a folks from academia, 7 university presidents, 5 CEOs of the private sector, then his own team, members of our own team. So they collected ideas, and this was one of those which they moved forward.
So need-driven innovation. So I was at a meeting the other day where the speaker was saying, this was a faculty member of ours, they're saying is that he drives his research around the notion of solving a particular problem rather than deriving a solution. Sometimes you derive the solution, then you search for the market for that solution, as opposed to solving a particular problem. So that's what you're talking about, I think.
It is capability building around the current and future needs.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's more than solving a
Yes.
specific problem.
Yes, okay. All right. Mitzi?
I'd say 2 things. One, universities in general, I think, will need to be easier to do business with. We're sometimes not easy to engage, and therefore, from the standpoint of collaborative value creation and technology development, we're not moving as quickly as we could be. So that has to do
one
with
idea is speed up the universities.
speed up universities and for example, the tech.
This, by the way, is the university president's watch, and it each thing that looks like a second is actually a semester.
That's
So you
right.
got to speed up the universities, right?
I wasn't talking about ASU, of course.
Yeah,
Other
of course.
Universities. And then my second, educationally, I would say we need to reintroduce the concept of failure, that it's okay to fail in experimentation. I don't mean failing as in a test, but I mean experiment, problem-based learning, and get back to a new approach to education so that we encourage the processing of failure so you can learn, experiment, invent, create.
Okay. We'd have to spend more time than we have talking about how do you do that, but Amy?
I guess mine's a little bit piggybacking on what you said. I really do think it's transforming the educational system. I mean, I'm focused on higher education, but transforming the higher education system to make innovation a viable career path or make innovation something that is sort of throughout the entire system, whether it's the licensing or even how tenure, there's one institution, probably it's UNC, where they're talking about actually making tenure tied to sort of an innovation as opposed to a publication in a journal that 3 people read. I mean, throughout the educational system, if that becomes something.
It's not 3, it's 4 people read the journal.
Right.
Not 3.
Well, that's your article in the journal.
Chris?
I'm going to take a page out of our international playbook. We've instituted hundreds of programs with governments around the world to drive technology adoption and innovation. And most of those entail taking government away, either by getting rid of value-added taxes, tax capabilities, or using their revenues to incent versus deter. And we probably should be doing the same thing in our own country, which is incenting innovation, incenting efficiencies.
So give an example of incenting efficiencies or innovations.
I'll give you one we're doing right now in Brazil. We're taking Child Fund International's program where we're managing the kids you guys pay $10 a month to support. We've reduced the time to manage a kid from a week to 25 minutes per kid using cloud services delivery models, which means we can manage a whole bunch of more kids in the same methodology. That's an incredible incentive, and we can do that in any one of our institutionalized programs around the world. It's not just social benefit. We can do it in business benefit. The healthcare system, great one. We have totally inefficient systems. How could we incent to have them be efficient instead of inefficient? And so breaking the mold to incent for the right approach as opposed to incent for revenue or incent for I would hate to say votes or other methodologies.
Okay, Rob?
I'm sure Jim is going to talk about the patent system, so I'll let him do that. Instead, I want to, what I would love to see Congress do, but I'm sure it will never actually do because it would make too much sense, is take another look at an obscure section.
I hear there's a new one coming in, so we can ask them. So.
I'm not too confident. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act has this anti-circumvention clause, which makes it a crime to interfere with the technological form of content protection, which probably seemed like a good idea in the late 90s, make sure that nobody can break the lock on a DVD, although DVDs weren't quite around then. And it's had all these toxic effects in the market. In the short term, the DMCA's anti-circumvention clause means that product features get to be determined not by the market, but by various licensing bodies. There are lots of features you might want in a DVD playback program. You cannot get them because the agency that licenses DVD copy protection, which protection, the DVD is being protected from you actually using it like everyday property, just won't let them happen. Of course, if you use open source programs like the VLC player, you get around that quite nicely. And the more toxic long-term effect is the DMCA gets people to think that if you just use the right technological content restriction, you can recreate scarcity in the market. You can make bits work more like atoms, where suddenly you do have a limited supply of something. And that gets in the way of a transition we all have to get through in the long run. And that's just a fundamental break on innovation. I don't think it's ultimately helping the companies that are wasting time on DRM in the first place.
So further freeing up of the whole enterprise, we had a discussion the other day at the university where we were talking about we're putting in 20 megawatts of solar, and then somebody says, and then what are you doing to allow any graduate student that has any idea that can plug into the grid? And then they said, well, we can't do that in the grid, and then we decided, but we can do it within our own grid. So we're going to be launching a way in which we can allow any idea relative to the production or use of energy be pluggable into this overall enterprise. So that's what you're talking about.
And the other thing to realize about the DMCA is, we've been talking about what's happening in China. The DMCA does not actually stop wide-scale, industrial-level infringement of copyrighted material. It doesn't at all. So, it's not even helping in that measure.
Okay. Diana?
I resonate with a lot of other points, the room for failure. The Stanford Social Innovation Review just had a piece on the starvation cycle that nonprofits have because the allowable overhead is somewhere around 15 to 20% that nonprofits are allowed, whereas if you look at R&D in for-profit industries, it's much bigger. So how do folks in the social sector who are dependent on philanthropic dollars have space to innovate and fail and run with the idea that comes in 3 months after the budget has been set?
The only sector, by the way, which has lower levels of research spent on its activity is education. But go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And another idea I throw out is how do we, Ashoka has been built on this idea of looking across the world for early stage innovation, and that it is a predictive factor. And just one example, we found one year that all of a sudden we found 6 social entrepreneurs on 4 different continents working with sports for social change. It wasn't so unusual because we had seen them before, but we'd never found 6 in 1 year. And one of our board members noted this, and it propelled us to go have a conversation with Nike as they were rethinking their CSR. They did some ethnographic work. They sat down and talked with a number of these innovators that we brought together. This led to Nike making a series of investments in sports for social change organizations, and 6-7 years later, there's now a global movement in the form of an organization called Beyond Sport. This is just one tiny example of the kinds of things that we've been able to see and seed and spur by tracking early stage innovation. So I can imagine sitting around a room trying to come up with what's the innovation is pressure, but if you're constantly fed by ideas and find mechanisms to source those innovations that are happening out there in the marketplace, that you'll have a constant feeder.
Okay. Jim, your idea?
All right. Well, unfortunately, I have 2 because I thought Rob was going to really hammer home the intellectual property issue. But I'll do it quickly. Whether it's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, whether it's a patenting system, whether it's the copyright system, so many of these artificial legal systems have the effect of taking the power of abundance, right? Ideas can be easily
I'm still
copied
processing
and shared.
artificial legal systems, but go ahead.
No, legal systems are artificial constraints on something that is abundant and makes it scarce is clearly a deadweight economic loss unless you can argue it somehow dramatically increases R&D. And since these things have been placed, that has not been true. So working through those systems to allow abundance to occur and information ideas to be shared is critical. The other just practical one, and call me an optimist, the average person that I deal with, whether that's in universities or at Red Hat or in companies, people are innovative by nature. They are inquisitive by nature. The problem is our systems that have gotten in their way. So just a simple, easy idea, allow things like social networking to occur, inside your company. Red Hat, people come to Red Hat, and we have something called memo lists where anybody can say anything, and I'm called an idiot at least 10 times a day on it, and I have a thick skin. It's probably true. So, but literally just allowing people to share ideas and communicate inside the company's own firewall on things going on inside the company and ask questions and debate things can be incredibly powerful to push innovation forward. And the big issue there is just fear. Senior execs don't want to hear some of these things. And I love it. It's great. But very few companies do that. But it's really a simple, easy way that can increase the overall level of innovation in a company.
So let's go to questions. If there's questions or comments from the audience, we've got a couple of microphones. Got a question up front here. Question in the back there. Start with the one in the front. Just say your name and who you're with, because this is being broadcast. So.
Sean Hayes. Is this on?
Is the microphone on?
Sean Hayes with the New America Foundation and ASU. I wanted to address my question to Santok. He sounded early on what is a now familiar refrain that part of the problem with innovation in the United States is the tax structure and the regulatory structure and the way it's weighing corporations down. Alternatively, those regulatory structures and tax structures also lend themselves to improving the standard of living for many Americans. So is it a zero-sum game? I mean, what exactly should we be having a conversation with Americans that they need to be willing to possibly accept more uncertainty in their standard of living in order to fuel innovation, or is there a way around that?
My comment was more towards the movement of the jobs being transported to wherever, at least out of the U.S. And I was talking about what contributes to it. And I think in light of the open innovation, the topic of discussion, if we at least get some relief from those, tax policy, the trade policy, and those at least, and also the talent. Academics can put a little bit more emphasis on the talent which is going to be needed for the future rather than the traditional vertical education. I think those will be the enablers. Now, your question about expect to have the standard of living lower, I think if we don't make some changes, I don't think we're going to be able to maintain it.
Okay. And one in the back, I think. Yeah. Can you stand up, please?
Oh. Hi, I'm Jennifer Shee. I'm with the National Academy of Sciences. And my question, I'm trying to bring this, I guess, back to a very basic question, which we all have a very strong intuition, I'm sure, of what exactly innovation is. And this is open to anyone on the panel, but how do you define innovation? How do we measure it? And how will we know if open innovation is actually going to be effective?
Who wants to take a stab, Matthew?
I'd like to quote Elaine Dundon from The Seeds of Innovation, that innovation is the profitable implementation of creative strategy. That's one that I think is probably most apt because I think it speaks to, one, the goal to drive change, the introduction of new ideas, new thinking for us in the hospitality industry, new experiences that drive loyalty and at the same time drive shorter-term revenues and profits as well as longer-term shareholder value.
But you could add social profits to that same concept.
Absolutely.
It would mean the same thing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it works in both ways. Anybody else want to take a stab at that?
Steve Jobs said it was...
What did he ever do?
Never. Well, he said innovation was connecting the dots, and I think that's a very powerful way of thinking of it. It's not having to be brand new thinking. it's thinking new about what's around you and putting a new solution out.
And leveraging what he also added to that, leveraging what you're standing on. So the dots are on top of a massive dots, and you're connecting dots from it. You're standing on top of something and leveraging all of that.
So we don't have to start anew. We have to start where we're at and be creative with what's there.
Mm-hmm.
But to emphasize, measuring that is really hard. My board continues to ask, let me see a measure of innovation. How innovative are you? And it is really hard to come up with. You can measure the ultimate success of a product that comes out of innovation, but are you being innovative fundamentally? It is a really hard problem.
Okay, well, Matthew, then we'll go to the next question.
And I like Jeff Bezos' definition of how to measure innovation, and he describes it as the number of small failures. And in his, I don't have his exact quote, but the point was, if you're not generating enough small failures where that allow you to recycle those learnings into new product and service platforms, then you're not really swinging for the fences. You're not going for the big idea, the white space, the game changer. So that's a great way, I think, to measure. Unfortunately, it's not very popular with senior executives and people that control the budgets.
I'd like my room at Marriott to have the bed floating next time.
That's next. That's next. Another 10 years.
Yeah. There was someone over here, I think they were pointing out, right there, yes.
My name is Martin Apple from the Council of Scientific Society Presidents. Mike Crow started out with a 4% growth rate as the assumption for what it takes to grow jobs and so forth in the United States.
4% is what it takes for the country to move forward economically on a sustained basis, and we haven't been there for a long time.
We are, in fact, quite capable of innovation. We don't seem to be as capable in capturing the value of the innovation. We love to send it elsewhere. What do you propose? Which one of you has probably the best idea that you would like to throw out for how we can keep that here?
So who'd like to take that? Mr. Multinational Corporation Global Insight Leader, Chris.
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
Unless, Chris, you want to go? I'll give you a second to think.
I was just going to quote another icon, Andy Grove, who says, only the paranoid survive. And we drive innovation daily. I mean, we introduce new products every 6 months. Our job is to outrun ourselves. And I think the change we have to deal with in growth is to think that way, apply Moore's law to everything we do instead of saying, hey, I got my job, I'm blocking everybody else, and I'm happy. And so if you think about MBA school, and I'm going to challenge your MBA school to get rid of this policy of what blocks my competitors from succeeding, as opposed to how do I team to succeed and go faster.
I mean, as a teaching methodology, right?
Yeah. In other words, if you go to MBA school, your job is delay the economy for everybody else. Right? Think about it. That's what you teach.
Defeating your enemy.
You're defeating the purpose of everybody else's innovation to succeed for yourself. And that's what you get out of MBA school. And this is Chris, not Intel talking.
Your PR department's having a heart attack.
No, but on the other hand, we've driven our whole business, and we've done pretty well over the last few years, on putting ourselves out of business and staying ahead of our competition. And the few times we've slowed down, we've actually lost. And so we have to go fast. And so, we can only model what we do, and I think we've done pretty well at it. And so I think that's the change. We have to think differently. We have to outrun ourselves, and we have to go as fast as our customers can adopt it.
I wanted to sort of riff off that it's not enough to succeed, others must fail line. There's definitely bad innovation. Right now in Washington, there's some really creative, fantastically innovative work being done by people looking for new ways to gain the tax code so that they have an advantage that no other company in America or in the world can get. We need to make sure that the law, the operating system of this country rewards innovation that actually has a point and that other people can build off of, and that doesn't turn the government, the tax code, all these other things we have to live with into games that only people with very good lawyers and lobbyists can play effectively.
Specifically, how do you keep more of this in the United States? Innovation happens in clusters. I don't think so many startups happen in Silicon Valley because, people like the tax rates or the real estate prices in California. It happens there because there are other people there, and ideas built upon ideas capital flows around, different management teams find different ideas, failures accepted, and it's built over time. And, there was the classic race at one point between, Boston and Silicon Valley, and over time, that weight moved to Silicon Valley because it was an open set of innovative companies all working together in different ways. And there's, whether it's venture capital providing the glue to get management teams and ideas together, that cluster exists because it existed last year and it existed the year before. So from a public policy perspective, thinking about those clusters, we see that where Red Hat's based in North Carolina with Research Triangle Park and the number of different businesses and therefore spinoffs out of those different businesses. We need to think about that and make sure that we are building the mechanisms to allow that dialogue to happen in those clusters to build, because they're most likely to continue to grow right where they are.
Over here, microphone.
Thank you. Nigel Cameron, Center for Policy on Emerging Technologies. I've been listening to Chris Thomas's boss, Paul Otellini, over the last year or two, making his stump speeches in which he's been saying Washington has to change. He's not quite saying the sky is falling, but he's been halfway up the register to saying that. I was in China 2 days ago, where, of course, everybody is purring when they overhear this kind of conversation.
Purring?
Purring.
Yes. Is that a British concept?
I think it's perhaps a Chinese concept at the moment. They're certainly purring over our having this sort of angst. Now, my question is this really a fundamental paradigm question? Washington has to change. This is a fundamentally bad situation for the nation, for the future, for technology. Is this a matter, which I think some of the panelists have been saying, for adjustments here and there, things aren't too bad, we need to sort out the IP question and so on? I'm just wondering what the scope of the question is. I think if we could address that, then perhaps we'd be in a better position to remedy it. Thank you.
Let me probably clarify where Paul's saying that, because I can't tell you which issue he was talking about. Probably he was talking about broadband. And if you look at the American broadband infrastructure compared to China and in most of the emerging market, we're behind. And it's because of our regulatory practices, and it's because we're not allowing ourselves to take the innovations we've already made. And so when he says Washington has to change, it's we're building innovations and we can sell them outside the U.S. and we can make other countries go faster than we can, and you won't let it happen here. That's what he means by Washington has to change. In other words, we're not innovating. It's just not going into the U.S. because our customer base can't accommodate it because of the laws. That's what he means by Washington has to change. And that's why China's purring. And by the way, Paul's in China launching our new Dalian site or fab right now, today. So, yeah, we've got a challenge. Do we want to move everything over to other countries? No. But do we want to do business in those countries? Yes. To do business in those countries, we have a presence in those countries. We did the same thing in Ireland to be in the European Union. Working globally requires work. But here we are moving some of the best technologies in the world at aggressive paces. Our own country is the one that's falling behind.
So last question, I think the microphone is in the back. Yes?
Sean Bai from the National Institutes. So the NIH obviously has a really specific role that we play in innovation, and we've started setting aside money specifically for what we call high risk, high reward.
Spending $30 billion as a part of this.
Yeah. We do spend a lot of money. And we think very hard about the role that we play in innovation. But obviously the NIH is a really specific kind of beast that interacts with specific markets in very specific ways. And I do want to ask another question about, what role government can play. But instead of looking at it at this 30,000 feet level of, lower taxes, changing regulation, Washington must change, what are concrete ways that individual institutions within the government interacting with individual companies, what are programs that institutions like the NIH can come up with that will help industry to foster innovation?
I'll start. Red Hat spent a lot of time trying to figure out how you make money off of something that is fundamentally free. And the word we continue to come around with, which is our mission statement, is to be the catalyst in communities of contributors and partners and customers building better technology the open source way. There are a lot of companies who can serve as catalysts, because it depends a lot on the characteristics of the business. I think government institutions and specific departments in specific areas, if you think of your role as to be the catalyst, right? The catalyst. So how do you make the right targeted investments in specific areas? How do you think about an ecosystem that you're trying to build. We think in terms of sustainability and ecosystem in the same way you would think about it in an environmental context. But thinking about your role there as the kind of nonprofit steward to be able to play the catalytic role. So you're not a supporter, you're not a participant, you also can't be the absolute leader, but the catalyst. So I'd spend a lot of time thinking about what it means to be a catalyst in the specific areas where you're trying to drive innovation and position, your role doing that, because that's what we need to get these communities going. And once they get going, it's extraordinary to see the success, but there's got to be a catalyst that gets it going and keeps it going.
Maybe we have time for one more comment, so let's go with Diana.
I completely agree with that, and I would add that the government has the ability to listen because it touches every citizen in a way that none of us probably can. And so you can get that feedback loop. An analogy, I'm so glad you asked this question, because my favorite analogy is that if you're tracking social innovation, it can be the analogy is an epidemiological study, but it's for social solutions. It's not for diseases. So the government has a unique opportunity to be a listening factor because you're touching every citizen.
So our objective today was to get some ideas into the grist mill in a very, very important topic for our country, taking this angle, which was to look at open innovation, to not just limit it only to technology, but service industries, social enterprises, technology enterprises. It's all the same, in many ways, the same process, the same dynamics, and how do you facilitate all of that? How do we drive national creativity and entrepreneurism? How do we make these things happen? And so I think the panel's done a great service by getting a lot of ideas out on the table. So I'd like to all of us thank the panel.